afternoon, everyone. I need more energy. I see the average age under 20. And you've got money from World Bank, you have to smile. Because the topic up here is very difficult. We need to have energy. So we've been discussing interoperability, enforcing instant payment, but it comes with big challenges, which is scammers, frauds. So the panel here is going to discuss one of the open source tool that we adopted from Rwanda. My name is Aimable Rukundo. I'm the Chief Digital Innovation at RSwitch. We are proud to announce that we have deployed Tazama, and it's going to be our main fraud monitoring tool to help our market to have visibility on the fraud and also educate the market. So I have on the panel very good experienced people. Wanted them to introduce themselves before we tackle the questions. Over to you, Justice.
Hi, my name is Justice Ortlip. I'm the product manager for Tazama, and we're also very proud to be here, and congratulations on your implementation of such a wonderful fraud detection and monitoring tool. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Bonaparte Ituze. I'm a Director of Engineering at Wayadin, Rwanda, and I also happen to be to lead the engineering team on all the implementations that Aimable was talking about.
He's the man behind. Please clap for him. On both module loop deployment, now having 2 use cases live, he's the man and his team behind it. Thank you very much, Bonaparte.
Hello, everyone, again. My second panel for today, back to back. And I'm very delighted to be seated next to these 2 gentlemen. And for those of you who were not here, my name is Nyanya Dabo, and I work with the Institution for Inclusive Digital Africa. Thank you.
All right. Let me start with Justice. Okay. Since we have new faces, we'll be talking about Tazama, fraud monitoring. Could you tackle and explain what it is and what was the challenges during implementation around the Tazama?
Okay. So Tazama is a real-time open source transaction monitoring system. So effectively, it is our origin story is not that much different from Moduloops. Started our journey with the level 1 project principles that the Gates Foundation coined and then used to create both Modulloop and then eventually also Tazama. So the problems that we aim to solve are largely related to, if you have instant payment systems, you need instant protection for the people who use those systems. So some of the bigger challenges that we would have during implementations, largely the regulatory environments are not yet driving fraud as a sort of a primary concern. Regulatory environments are still very concerned about money laundering in their ecosystems, but fraud is not yet a regulated sort of a drive within some of these ecosystems. So if you are implementing a fraud system in these environments, very often a lot of these players don't have an existing system. They don't have a lot of experience in implementing or operating these systems. So from our perspective, it is being able to educate people to understand what they need from a system like that, why they need it, how that would benefit themselves and their customers, and what they can then expect from a system such as Tazama in those environments. The implementation itself is not quite as complicated, I guess, as the operation. So in your experience as well, your implementation went very well. It is more after the fact, how do you make sure that you keep maintaining your models so that you can keep up with fraud trends in your environments? How do you understand and interpret the outcomes of the system? How do you make sense of those? And how do you then keep on using the system to keep protecting your customers from fraud?
That's excellent. As you said, it's new, and it was even hard to give them feedback until we went through all the default rules. We couldn't even find any more rule we can think about. But consulting the market will help us to get more insight. Nyanya, could you tell us the trend? Since it's new, maybe the audience here would like to know the trend of fraud in instant payment across Africa.
So basically, I can just share the trend based on what we hear in the markets and in the field. And what we hear from the players, these are the DFSPs, the regulators, the hub, as the ecosystem is increasingly becoming instant and inclusive, the fraud trend also is increasing. So we're seeing that trend. We also witnessing where like social engineering and foolish boys is becoming more of a threat to instant payments. And also fraudsters are taking advantage of the very features of instant payments that's driving inclusivity, such as the speed, you know, to kick in and make those attempts. But I think what is comforting is that these are solvable challenges by creating the right awareness, educating the public, and these can be done collectively by the DFSPs and the regulator. Thank you.
Excellent. To Bonaparte, what was the main vulnerability challenges you found while implementing Tazama? And I think it was fast, but I know there was here and there fixes that you've done.
Yeah, thank you very much. So as you said, I would say the deployment and the installation of Tazama itself was very straightforward. Just as said, they share the same DNA as Mojaroop. I see Bush there. So first implementation on Mojaroop switch, first deployment on Mojaroop switch, first deployment on Tazama. So I agree with Justus on that. Of course, no matter how straightforward it can be, there are always challenges that one is going to meet while deploying a tool, especially a new tool on premise like it was at our switch. But the main vulnerabilities, the main challenges are mainly what one could think of like now that Tazama is introduced as a fraud monitoring tool, then what are the new vulnerabilities that are introduced that partly we didn't have before, or some we didn't have that can now are going to become exposed in a bit. So one is, so when we talk about transaction processing in an instant payment system, for example, in our case, we are always targeting 1 second, not more. That, in a way, even though a low percentage, that prevents you from a little bit of some threats that can happen in systems that have delayed transactions, for example, like the pay later systems. So now that we introduce a new tool in between, so that means latency is going to be increased. So some latency-related vulnerabilities are going to be, so basically you're giving more time for the exploiters to be able to figure you out eventually. Another one that is, I think, very obvious is, of course, we are telling everyone now we have a fraud monitoring tool. We can be able to detect and report, and even at some point block fraudulent transactions. But still, as an instant payment system, we are still relying on what comes from the participants. So if they are compromised, no matter how much you are trying to protect them, still, if they're compromised, you might start having transactions that look like a real legitimate transaction while they are fraudulent. And then another one that is obviously, that is very obvious here is we have deployed a tool that we depend on. Let's say tomorrow we have a problem with it and it stops working. So that means what do we do when it comes to the switch itself? Do we stop because fraud monitoring is not working, or do we say let's now let everything through? So I think whichever way, if you stop, probably you have problems with people upstairs. But if you read through that, that's also another problem that if it goes well, fine, but it can turn into a disaster in a very short time. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Let me pass to Justus. In the morning, we were discussing about performance. How do you balance speed and accuracy and avoiding blocking legitimate users who are sending transactions?
So from our performance or perspective, that balance is essential. So you want to be able to be quick enough so that you can interrupt a transaction that is in flight, but you also want to do it in a way that is accurate so that you don't block a transaction or interrupt a transaction that is a legitimate transaction. So that's a fair requirement from any operator who wants to protect your customer experience. So our turnaround time for any evaluation in Tazama is less than 50 milliseconds at the moment. And we can handle scale up to 2,700, 2,800 transactions per second. And the system is built and designed in a distributed architecture fashion so that you can add more components to it in a modular way so that you don't impact that performance. That performance is intended to be stable and static throughout your system's lifetime. The accuracy itself is informed by the rule processors. So we have 33 rules that evaluate a number of different behaviors inside the platform. And the combined effect of those rule processors gives you a very high level of accuracy. If you make a decision on just a single behavior to try and determine if the transaction is fraudulent, then you are going to end up with a large number of false positives. And ideally, what you want to be able to do is to say, this behavior combined with a number of other behaviors will give you a clear picture of whether the transaction is fraudulent or not. And then you can take appropriate and decisive action and accurately. So the system is designed for both of those aspects to be highly efficient and also highly accurate.
Excellent. Soon I will give you feedback about it. So I'm experiencing it. I'm the very fast adopter. I think with Bonaparte, we'll definitely offer you a good number of feedback. So to Nyanya again, I want you to respond to as many questions as possible. So still, even if we put measures, we put systems in the middle, still fraud happens. Where do we push liability? Is it on the switch? Is it on participant? Is it on regulator? Where do you advise to put liability on?
So just similar to the way we're pushing for shared ownership, I think liability and accountability also must be shared. But having said that, it has to be proportionate and aligned with capabilities and oversight responsibilities. Now, when it comes to fraud, I would focus on the two different levels, the institutional level, and these are the banks, the MNOs, and then the regulatory level. And we know that the banks and these MNOs, they have responsibilities to ensure that the due diligences in place. I mean, the KYCs, the first line fraud sort of measures are in place and are sort of kind of protected and ring-fenced. And on the regulatory side, making sure that the compliance, setting the standards, making sure they're responsible for the responses within the ecosystem. So it must be shared, and where, certain things are lacking at the institutional level, they would take full responsibility, and whatever is lacking at the regulatory level, also the regulator must take responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. As you said, the liability and accountability should be shared. Let me ask Bonaparte to share with us the data flow. We are enforcing transparency here, and we need to give participant visibility on what happens. How do we promote transparency, and how do we also give visibility in case there is any fraud or anything that is disputed participants?
Okay. Thank you. I'll probably go back to start by talking a little bit about how we were able to connect Tazama with our current module loop supported switch, and then it will make sense how participants now. So I think not very specific to us when it comes to connecting Tazama with module loop switch. So the interfaces themselves of the two have been designed to kind of talk to each other. So it's not that much effort that is required. So basically what we've done in our case is on the entry point of the switch, basically at the very first moment we receive transactions from participants. Of course, there are some business logic, business rules that have to be validated before that. But at the same time, we also engage Tazama. They both, we use ISO 222, same with Tazama, so it's very easy to connect. So basically at that point, the evaluation of the transaction has started, while the switch also has the transaction validated. So now after that comes a decision on do you want to use fraud management system in a broking way or a non-broking way. So for us, we use non-broking. So that means we use it as basically reporting. Eventually, I'm sure if a map after a month sees 70% all being reported, he will say now start broking. But right now, we're not broking. So if you're broking, that means you have to wait until Tazama has finished its evaluation. If you're not, the switch can continue while also Tazama is doing the evaluation. There can be a question here on where do you actually invoke Tazama. That can depend on business requirements. I think the very obvious place is within the quoting service, within the switch. But depending on business requirements, it can be anywhere in the switch. I think it's very possible. So now, for us, once that has been done, we've invoked Tazama. The transaction has gone to the ledger, processed. We have another stage where we now go to Tazama to fetch report about that particular transactions. So once we've fetched the reports, I mean, we've done a number of tests to see if the switch can finish processing a transaction where Tazama is still doesn't yet have the evaluation report, so we haven't seen any. So the 50 milliseconds that Justus was talking about, I mean, we've validated it, so it's true. So at that point, we've basically fetched reports. So now it comes to how do we present it to both hub operators and also the FSP. So we have a portal for the two where they see live transactions, they see everything related to the usage of the switch, disputes, and so on. So there we also do populate reports related to transactions. Obviously, the most important ones for them is the ones that have been flagged. So that's what they start with. But if they want to see basically the evaluation details for all transactions that have been carried out within a particular settlement cycle, they can be able to see that. And so that's how they have visibility.
So, thank you, Bonaparte. I think we transparently displayed the Tazama result on the participant portals. They have visibility. And of course, what comes first is the flagged transactions. Mm-hmm. But also, we also notify. We notify the hub, and we also notify the participant involved on flagged transactions. So let me switch to the audience. Any questions so far? Or anything that you need clarification on? I see the hand.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask, in deploying Tazama, there's so many things that go into it as well in terms of regulatory guidelines. So the first question is, what are the regulatory for fraud management at the switch level? And when Tazama was being deployed, what changes were done? And also, I heard you mention stakeholder involvement. What's the level of stakeholder involvement, and what's the plan to gather stakeholder feedback to customize these rules as well? Just as a learning experience for other people that want to deploy Tazama.
Take it, Bernard. Yeah. Thank you very much. So your question involves some parts that are a bit outside my scope, so I will try to answer some, but we have Imabri here, so yeah. So so maybe I would focus on, you asked about, did we have to make any changes to have Tazama supported? Yes, but very minimal. As I said, they both support ISO 222. So basically, the only thing that was required is to build what you can call like a translation layer in between. And then you make sure that you are asynchronously broadcasting all the transactions to Tazama. And yeah, as I said, if you were to do in a broken way, you will have to have some mechanism to wait for the fraud evaluation to be completed, but in any case, it's very minimum changes.
On participant involvement, we have a fraud forum where we have representative of all participants. We always discuss the different type of frauds. We recently presented the default rules in Tazama, which was really appreciated. So far, we haven't got any other required rules that need to be added. Thank you to Justus for being that detailed. But also, while we are doing exploratory, we agreed with the team of Tazama to also do capacity building for our internal team to also be able to add rules whenever it comes, both on interface level, but also at the code level. I think we are very confident that soon when it becomes a requirement, we'll achieve that.
In terms of reporting to the central bank when the fraud is detected?
The central bank is the one leading the fraud forum because it involves the switch and participants. They are also involved in the discussion. And of course, we are putting the rules in between. Apart from the platform, we also have operation rules, and we have dispute and fraud procedure that everyone had signed to accommodate.
So this is not going to be strictly about Tazama, but since someone on the panel brought up the issue of fraud, of compensation for fraud victims, I wanted to get your thoughts about the issue of moral hazard in authorized push payment fraud compensation. Is it real? Do you see it across the countries where you're operating? Are there any solutions?
Well, no. I mean, okay. So, I mean, on the West Africa, mainly Gambia, no, we haven't seen that. And what we've seen in the conversations is the burden of that fraud is left on the end user, which really affects trust and which would eventually affect usage. Thank you.
And then to add to that, so traditionally, and I don't necessarily want to throw the banks under the bus, right? But the bank is a commercial entity, so it often had an adversarial posture against its clients. So if the client was caught with in a malware scam, for example, or a phishing scam or something like that, the bank would do an investigation, and if the client turned out to be at fault, the client was left adrift, and the client would have to end up covering their own losses. And then there are some territories where you now have some recourse if you're the client, so you can escalate your concern to an ombudsman or some sort of arbitrator, and there are systems and mechanisms in place. But I find the approach for shared liability actually softened the bank's posture a little bit, so that they're not immediately so adversarial, but there's more of a collaborative aspect to sharing the liability. So the bank is going to be on the hook, and they are therefore also incentivized to assist the customer when the customer is defrauded. And even better, prevention here is definitely better than cure. So the banks are now incentivized to also put in place the systems to prevent fraud in their networks, to educate their customers properly. And I think that is a key element of how we are going to fight fraud across the world and in specific ecosystems. Is your customers need to be educated, your regulators need to start putting in place and pressure in place to incentivize your commercial institutions to participate in that safety. And I think that's going to be a key going forward.
So also, I may add, unintentional fraud. By this, I mean like the end user sending money to the wrong person, and that person uses it right away. So these are the kind of fraud trend that we see increasing in Africa, and the burden is left on the end user to lose the money or to try and recover the money. So we should also consider that. Thank you.
Justus, tell us about this openness, how the central banks are adopting the... Someone has a question? James.
No, please continue. I'll ask later.
So how are central banks trusting this tool across Africa?
I think the question ties into also whether or not people feel that open source software itself is safe. We saw the question earlier in James's presentation as well when he was giving feedback. People are always nervous about it because they think that the openness is a problem. Right? But the openness inside open source software is definitely the benefit of open source software. The software itself is transparent. Everybody who's involved in that software chain, from the developers to the users, can immediately see what is happening in the software. There are so many more different people looking at the software and the behavior of the software that you have auditability across that software's value chain. And there is also very good governance around a lot of these packages. So even though we may use upstream software packages that we haven't developed ourselves, that we are dependent on, those packages are constantly screened for vulnerabilities and for introducing risks. We have to constantly then respond to those. So, and our response time and turnaround time in open source software is typically much greater. There was a recent vulnerability that they found in one of the API dependencies, and it was fixed within a matter of hours. If you rely on a commercial software for that, so typically what would happen is a hacker organization, white hat hacker, might find a vulnerability, and then they would call the bounty on the organization, and then the conversation would kind of go quiet, and then that organization would fix that vulnerability, and only then will they announce that there was in fact a vulnerability and they have now patched it. So that sort of closed perspective on your systems that you rely on are sometimes more risky than a system that is open and for anybody to be able to see what is happening inside the software.
How are central bank adopting that? Because you already said it. It's called open source, it's suspicious. How do you present it to the central banks?
We don't find an unwillingness necessarily. The central banks do want assurances, and I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize already is that they are already all users of open source software to some degree or another. I can't remember what the statistic is, but there's most of the world's cloud services, network services, internet services runs on Linux infrastructure already. Right? So they're already invested in open source software. We are telling them that we are following that same pattern, we are following that same rigor, the same governance, the same safety and security, the auditability and the transparency in our own software. So this is an extension of an ecosystem that they are already heavily invested in.
Excellent.
So let me have Justin here, because we work with central banks. But also what we've seen, central banks are known to be very, very conservative and very inward, but we're seeing that change now. We're seeing central bankers opening up and very approachable. We've also seen their interest in innovation improving. So it makes it slightly easier than it would have 10 years ago, when it would be very difficult to knock at a central banker's door. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. James?
Yeah, just before I ask my question, I would just like to add one point to the open source versus closed source security discussion. We also encounter much resistance from the ultra-conservative, very risk-averse central banking fraternity. And I think much of that resistance is because of a misconception of the way security works in software. The analogy I like to use is that of a padlock. You'll know what a padlock is, has a key, it's a physical mechanism. The fact that you can't see inside the lock is similar to closed source software. Okay, I walk up to a door, it has a padlock on it, I can't see the internals of the lock. But if I'm a skilled lock picker, just by probing through the keyhole, I can figure out how the lock works inside, and I can unlock it. There's no security gained by having the internals invisible. In open source software, we flip that over and we say, well, anyone can see the internals of the lock. Please come and see if you can make it more secure for us. There's no downside at all. The question I was going to ask, in your experience of IIPS, have you noticed any particular characteristics of IIPS that are leading to new trends in fraud? And if so, are these the type of things that Tazama is intended to counter, and how we might counter those in future?
I'll take that one. So from an instant payments perspective, transactions are happening faster, transactions are happening in higher volumes, and there are patterns where instant payments actually does lend itself to sort of a higher volume of fraud. Right? So fraud also gets more automated, fraud becomes more AI-driven, so people want to capitalize, and especially also capitalize on the fact that these technologies are new and that the people themselves may be unfamiliar with how they work and how to protect themselves against these kinds of things. And it's also one of its biggest risks, because if people then have a bad experience in a new technology, they are going to tell other people about it, and then you have the erosion of trust, and the growth is then hampered in that particular technology. So there are certainly typologies that almost specialize in the instant payment space. Tazama is working on an anomaly detection engine itself, but the rules that we currently have were specifically designed for instant payments detection. And we don't just rely on the fraudulent behaviors, but we rely on the downstream money laundering behaviors as well. So once the money has been stolen from somebody's account, that money is moved away from the scene of the crime as quickly as possible. And those additional downstream behaviors help to inform the detection of the fraud in the future. So we use both sides of the sort of the transaction to try and identify the fraud. And all of our rules were designed initially from the ground up with an IIPS focus in the first place.
Thank you. That's a very good answer. I just want to add my congratulations on your go live to
Thank
Tazama
you.
and our switch. Great job,
Hey,
guys.
thank you, James. Thank you.
So-
Thank you
so
for your support as well.
Yeah. So I think, James, thank you for that security tip. That's a good selling point for us going forward. Just to add on to what Justin said, I think from our interactions with the Tazama team, what we tend to like, and this is when we say we, including the regulators that we represent and have sat with in the discussion rooms, is the flexibility. The flexibility to amend the rules, to customize them to fit the industry. Also, the flexibility to enhance and support the need of the regulatory. And one good example is the case management, which they're working on to enhance. So I think when you have a partner that has that flexibility to meet the partner's needs, it kind of solves many problems that's required in the market. Thank you.
Excellent. Now, I think we still have a few minutes to close. Let me take one question from the audience, and then we go to the closing.
Thanks a lot. This goes to Tazama. I just wanted to find out that the most traditional fraud management tools they are rule-based. And the fraudulent activities that are currently happening, they go beyond the rules that have been defined in the fraud management tools. What I wanted to find out, I have two questions actually. So the first one is I just wanted to find out, do you have capabilities or algorithms in the system where you can go beyond rule-based fraud management, probably be able to track patterns or trends, behaviors, and so forth? The second one, you mentioned that you do allow payment service providers to have access to the platform, especially when it is hosted by a national payment switch. So I just wanted to find also, is it possible for the platform to be, in terms of access, to extend it to other parties, authorities? I'll give an example, like in Malawi, where I come from, the Financial Crimes Act requires that all financial service providers, they're supposed to report not only fraudulent transactions, but also suspect transactions. So if we were, so it's the responsibility of the financial institution to report those transactions to the financial intelligence unit. I just wanted to know, is it possible to have the financial intelligence unit also have access to the platform so that they can track and monitor those transactions on their own? Thank you.
I'm going to answer the first question, so about what other mechanisms or algorithms we have. We specifically picked Tazama to be a rules-based system because it is the easiest and quickest way for somebody who's never implemented a system like that to start working with it, because the rules outcomes are transparent. You can immediately see why the system is creating a particular alert, and those rules results are organized in a number of different scenarios. So is it account takeover? Is it a scam? Is it money laundering that you're seeing? So that transition is already present in the system, where it's not just a single rule, but almost a composite scenario or an algorithm of rules. Beyond that, those rules and the way that they produce their outputs is already what we call AI ready. So you can then, as soon as you have enough labeled data in your network where you have concluded investigations and you have confirmed the results of some of those outcomes, you can use that labeled data to immediately train those models with artificial intelligence, and then that will improve the detection capability. The rules we are using aren't traditional rules. They are effectively, they generate artificial intelligence features already. So all you need to then be able to do is to build up the data to train them. So artificial intelligence is already catered for within the system. It'll just take a little bit of time for your system to catch up. In the second instance, the system is now fully end-to-end multi-tenancy compliant. So from a shared services perspective or a shared platform perspective, multiple institutions can use the same instance of the platform without tripping over each other's data. The case management system that our system integrator is also currently working on, PACES, that case management system will also be multi-tenanted and also allow access from outside the organization. So if you want to be able to give government or regulatory bodies or policing bodies, enforcement bodies access to the system to be able to handle and involve themselves in the investigations, you'll be able to do that.
Thanks a lot. Sorry. One more question. Final one. I'm not going to ask another
out
one.
of time.
Sorry, just one more. So this is, you mentioned something to do with anti-money laundering and CFT and all those, and I've got one question. I just wanted to find out, I know that all fraud monitoring tools, they have, you are able to do whitelisting as well as blacklisting. The question that I want to ask, if you blacklist certain transactions or their sources and so forth, is the tool able to block those transactions from going through all the way and being approved? Yes. Thanks.
Yeah, we can block at the entity level, the account level, and by specific transactions as well. So you choose the kind of blocking behavior you want to implement, and it can also be permanent or it can be overridden so that you can handle things like latest states through the system as well.
One on the access, thank you for the recommendation. The system has the capability. Whoever authority need access shall provide that. And also, since we are having data, the data analytics and insight could also indicate the type of frauds that are happening. As we close, I just want to thank the panelists. Thank you for answering all the questions. One word for everyone to close our panel, as we are over time 2 minutes. I would like everyone to say one word as we close. Thank you.
My one word would be real-time fraud detection at switch level.
Real-time fraud detection at the switch level.
I think mine will be kind of a wish: nationwide fraud monitoring tools, and maybe regional-wide. Why not national?
Excellent.
We didn't rehearse this at all, by the way. So we're all feel like the same kind of thing would be appropriate here. But for me, it's an extension of that is the knowledge sharing and the sharing of that fraud service and the information around it and the data around it in ecosystems, so that your scheme rules accommodates it and that your regulators are friendly towards the data sharing, because more information available to a switch to be able to do real-time transaction monitoring so that you can close the blind spot with the on-us transactions. That will massively reduce fraud in your ecosystems.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for being good audience. The panelists are still around. You can find them across for further discussion. Thank you.